Regional bodies SADC and the East Africa community have appointed 3 former leaders to try and bring together stakeholders in the DRC with the aim of ensuring there's a ceasefire in the conflict there. It's not clear when the 3 leaders will convene a meeting that will lead to inclusive dialogue. Now, the regional organizations are working hard to try and find a lasting solution to the current conflict in the DRC. The M23 group has announced that it's willing to engage in peace talks, but the government of the DRC has ruled out a possibility of engaging with the M23. There are reports that Kinshasa has reached out to other Western African countries requesting military assistance. There are fears this will lead to more tensions in the country. All right, for more on the story, we're joined by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. Good afternoon, Sophie. As always, thank you very much for joining us on the program. The big story now, the biggest development, is that of the next plane having landed with some of our troops. Can you just explain to us the staggered process of evacuation of injured soldiers?
Well, we know that this morning, as confirmed by the Department of Defense, the 3 injured soldiers who were critical arrived this morning, and they were airlifted with a small plane because of the nature of the injuries, and they were then admitted at the hospital for medical treatment, where they are being looked after and to ensure that they do recover. And there was a request to give them space and the family space during this difficult time. But we always knew that these are not the only soldiers who are supposed to be brought to South Africa. It's quite a big number, and therefore a bigger plane has just landed in South Africa carrying a bigger number. We are not sure how many they are. These are the ones that are injured, but not critically injured. We know that it was a difficult process because you have to use facilities that are fit for purpose in relation to evacuation, and also to ensure that the aircraft that we are using has facilities that could be used should there be any challenges. We know that the plane left Tanzania. From Tanzania, then it went to Malawi, and it landed in South Africa later today. We expect another batch to arrive perhaps before end of the week. Speculations are that they are likely going to arrive tomorrow, another bigger group, as we know that this morning it was such a small number of those who were critical.
You touch on the fact that the plane went to Tanzania and Malawi, so there would have been some troops from there that would have been also evacuated.
Yes, there were some troops from those countries. As you know that Summit DRC, you have South Africa, Malawi and Tanzania, and therefore they were also caught in a crossfire, and they also have those who passed on, as we saw previous weeks ago, where there were funerals and the information was communicated. And now also we know that there are some who were injured from those countries, and therefore they were able to be taken to their respective countries with that bigger plane.
When can we expect the next group to arrive, or is this still a very volatile situation where there's very minimal communication?
Well, the communication is very sketchy because you have to understand this is a very sensitive matter, and therefore you don't want a situation where you create challenges for those who have been given responsibility to implement this mission in terms of evacuation, and therefore they don't want to really divulge minute details. But we know that yesterday, many left the DRC via Kigali, that is Rwanda, and therefore you had those who were being dropped off at in Tanzania and in Malawi. But the issue here is that this is a sensitive matter, and there was an agreement with all stakeholders to ensure that you handle this in a very sensitive manner, particularly for those who are affected, the soldiers. You can imagine they are traumatized, some of them, but also their families, and also the tension, because it's not a normal accident. This was a conflict, and therefore you have warring factions, and therefore you have to ensure that neither of the affected parties is offended, and that can lead to perhaps a delay in terms of the implementation of this evacuation process, and also for the UN to be able to do this work in a very dignified manner in consideration of all those who are affected, including to ensure that you don't fuel tensions in relation to the warring factions or those countries that are involved.
No, it's quite understandable because the conflict is still ongoing, so one would assume that, as you say, the information would be minimal and just on a need-to-know basis. But we saw the SADC and EAC announcing a facilitation process. Who are these leaders that have been appointed to actually facilitate this whole peace process?
These are two former heads of state, the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, and also the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta was involved in this process of trying to bring peace in the DRC. He was appointed by East Africa Community Development Group. And on the other hand, you have now President Obasanjo, who was not involved, but I think as an elder on the continent, he was considered. You know that him and the former South African President Thabo Mbeki, they've been doing this work on the continent. You also have the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who has been doing a lot of work on the continent since he left office in trying to assist where there's a necessity to assist countries that are experiencing challenges. Therefore, you have two former heads of state and also a former head of government from Ethiopia who are charged with responsibility of ensuring that they are able to facilitate, not to mediate, but to facilitate a process where all warring factions can come together and you can find a solution in terms of this conflict in the eastern part of the DRC. And the intention here is to ensure that there's ceasefire and ceasefire does hold, and therefore you are able to continue to find a solution to address the challenge in the eastern part of the DRC.
All right, Sophie, thank you very much as always for that update. That's SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena there giving us the very latest following the second aircraft that has landed with injured troops in South Africa.